All right, super Bram Stoker's Dracula fan here, so I was looking forward to this one. Let's talk about it. So The Last Voyage of the Demeter is directed by André Overdahl, and it's the story of, well, the Demeter. Yes, you guessed it. Essentially, it's one chapter in Bram Stoker's book Dracula that's been translated to the big screen, in which the ship, the Demeter, is carrying very unsuspicious cargo, a bunch of crates that have really creepy dragon logos on them, one of which is housing Dracula, and it's carrying him from Transylvania to London. And I gotta say, this movie's a story that involves Dracula, but it's not really a Dracula story in the sense that a lot of Dracula stories revolve around Dracula, or at least the way I like to see him, because Dracula's fucking awesome. This is the story of the crew of the Demeter, who are faced with a situation of a monster is on board killing them all one by one. In that, the cast does an amazing job at keeping you engaged. I mean, it's all a talented crew. Corey Hawkins essentially plays the lead. Liam Cunningham, he's the captain of the ship. David Doss-Malchin, you see what I mean? Really talented crew. It's something about him. He is one of those actors that cannot be typecast or locked in a box. Pick a role from a hat. He can probably play that role. He's amazing. Now, the overall premise of this film is a layup on a ship that's small enough to feel claustrophobic, but big enough to have a lot of hiding spots. There's a monster on board tearing up the crew. Also, the monster is one of the most famous monsters in all of literature. It's when the film feels, I don't want to say small. It's really hard to peg the budget. A lot of times you can tell if a movie's a big budget film or a smaller budget film or indie film. I can't peg this one. I think they used the budget really well most of the time, but I like the fact that it didn't feel overproduced. I love the overall practical feeling of this movie. When it comes to Dracula, it was the best stuff in here. The creature design looked great when it was practical with makeup, and even then, there are different phases of his creature design. Yeah, at first he kind of looks like Gollum and Barlow had a kid. And he starts, feeding and getting sustenance, and his design changes to be more put together. He kind of looks like Nosferatu at a point, which is funny because Nosferatu was inspired by Dracula. And now Dracula's creature design in this movie kind of throws back to Nosferatu. So there's kind of a circle of inspiration happening with Dracula. The best and creepiest scenes are where someone sees him and they do a double take and he's gone, like that's the nightmare fuel that is a monster like this. But as I said earlier, this isn't a Dracula film per se. It's the film about a crew that's being hunted and killed on their ship by a monster that is Dracula. Sometimes in cinema we'll get Dracula the man. Other times we'll see a balance of the two. In this case, it is Dracula the monster. There's this one lady, she knows what Dracula is, and she says, this is a monster that can take the form of a man. That was such a great antithesis to how a lot of people, myself included, see Dracula. It's easy to see him as a man who takes the form of monsters. But he's not. He's a monster. The man is the lie. And in this particular movie, there's no reason to be a man. So let's just let the monster out. Which means at times it is hard to see him as a sentient being that could do mathematics if there was a chalkboard in front of him. He just kind of feels like a monster. You're seeing Dracula through a keyhole in here. It is one piece of his personality, but it is a piece that we generally don't get to see in its unbridled, unhinged fashion. This is Dracula the monster. And he don't give a fuck. Some of the kills were bloody and satisfying. There were also some moments of vampire flavor, vampire lore, that kept the movie from feeling like just a general monster on a ship. It's there to remind you, hey, this is a vampire story. As a vampire fan, as a Dracula fan, I appreciate that. This movie does feel like it's at war with itself at times, because whereas the build-up has such great practical effects, at a point, there's a little more CGI and it's just noticeable. The film was at its best when it was building that tension, when it was going for that subtle creep factor. Also, when it did some dark things that happen in here, it actually impressed me. And yes, this movie's about 2 hours long. Here comes the common gripe, but to be fair, it's a common gripe because it's so common that movies feel too long. This movie probably could have been a half an hour shorter. Crew on a ship getting picked off by a monster known as Dracula. I don't know why that can't be just a 90-minute home run right there. And I'll be honest, I didn't like the ending of this movie. It didn't feel like it mixed well with the rest of the movie. Probably a studio call. They're probably like, hey, you need an ending like this because we say so. I don't know. I wasn't in the room. But if we find out later that was the case, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. But if you look back at the rest of the film, it's this dark, slow burn, horror, psychological torment element film, you know, like, because they're seeing Dracula. They are seeing the impossible. What will that do? One of the characters in here, he starts going mad. You know, I really liked that. Human themes, psychological horror themes, and at the end, you just feel like, are you trying to set up for a sequel? Are you trying to franchise this thing? It just felt so weird. I didn't like it. You still trying to make this dark universe happen? Stop. I get the story goes on in the story of Dracula. This is chapter 7 of Bram Stoker's book. There is a chapter 8, but it's not that kind of setup. It's different, just didn't land with me. But the rest of the movie generally did. You know, I got these gripes here and there, but in the end, I enjoyed myself. If you're a Dracula fan, you absolutely should watch it. I had myself a bloody good time. No alcohol required. All right, last Voyage of the Demeter. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? What's your favorite Dracula story? You know Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola. That is my jam. I heard the one on Netflix is good, but I just haven't seen it. So anyhow, let me know. Whatever you think, comment below, let me know. And as always, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right here to see more.